Leading the field to the green flag of race 2 of the 2013 HARC Pro Series would be Andreas Allen in the 39 car. Stephen Henhock in the 20 car would be on his outside. Going on to the backstretch, Dixie Normus would go to the inside of Andreas Allen and try to make the pass, which she would do into turn 3. Then Leah Walker would go to the inside of her, and she would make the pass, going out of turn 4 and down the front stretch. Leah Walker would continue to lead for the next few laps as Alex Tanker was in second, and for third place, Shrimp and Grits and Penn Isman were battling it out for position. Alex Tanker would get to the inside of Leah Walker, going into turn 3 on the 5th lap. Out at turn 4, he would be able to make the pass. Further back in the field, we have 4-wide battle as Eric Cesar, Kyle Pilanini, Damir Bezhenov, and Shrimp and Grits all went 4 wide there going into turn 1. A couple laps later, James Bond got a huge run out of turn 4, and he was able to get to the inside of Alex Tanker and make the pass with some help from Zach Harvick. Going into turn 1, as James Bond and Alex Tanker still battled for position, Mitch McDonald dove in and stole the lead from both of them. Shortly afterward, Leah Walker would get to the inside of Mitch McDonald and would make the pass going into turn 3. Once again, the outside line had grip coming out of the turn, and Mitch McDonald was able to keep the lead a bit until James Davis went to the inside of both of them and made the pass out of turn 2. Leah Walker, not to be denied of taking the lead, would dive to the inside of James Davis on the front stretch and would make the pass with some drafting help from Robert Moss. Out of turn 2, James Davis would pull a crossover move, and he would dive to the inside of Leah Walker entering turn 3. Leah Walker would have the momentum out of the turn and they would battle down the front stretch. Eventually James Davis would get the lead and Leah Walker would get shuffled back in the pack. And with some help from Zach Harvick, they would stay 1-2 for the next few laps. Entering turn 3, Zach Harvick would get a run on James Davis and would get to the inside. He would eventually get that position with some help from Robert Moss. Robert Moss then decided that he should have a chance at the lead, and he went to the inside. But he wouldn't be able to get it as Zach Harvick's run was just too strong. Meanwhile, back in the field, Gary Tang got into Luke Walker, and they slid down the track, taking out Spencer Fullerton along their way, and Gary Tang went upside down, and turning over Luke Walker as well. Luke Walker and Gary Tang would both end up stopped on their roofs, while Spencer Fullerton will continue on. Let's check it out from another angle. Yet Gary Tang just got into Luke Walker in the right spot and flipped him upside down as well. Believe it or not, Luke Walker would actually continue in the race after some damage repair. Zach Harvick would lead them to the caution flag. Slowing down for the pace car, Dixie Normus turned Ron Young, and he would do a bunch of barrel rolls in the same stretch where Gary Tang and Luke Walker flipped. That was completely ridiculous that happened under caution. Under the yellow, the field would come in and make their pit stops. Dixie Normus would inherit the lead as she had the best pit crew and got out first. Luke Walker is the only car 1 lap down at this point. He had to come in to repair damages caused by, well, going upside down earlier in the crash. Penn Isman would get to the inside of Dixie Normus, and he would battle for the lead going into turn 3 and would get it with some help from Robert Moss, who immediately would try to make the pass as well. The lap car of Luke Walker slowed down the middle portion of the field and bent over got into Shrimp and Grits, which turned Peter Saviano down into the outside wall, and Peter Saviano was hit by Jacob Young and flipped upside down. The rest of the field had to check up to avoid the resulting spinouts, and many cars got damaged. Robert Moss would barely edge out James Davis to lead them to the caution flag. Some of the lead lap cars had trouble negotiating through the crashed cars' traffic, and Nathan Gibson got hit both in the front and the rear there. So now he has major damage, and quite a few of some of the fastest cars on the track now have damage. Robert Moss would lead them back to the green flag. Luke Walker, Andreas Allen, and Damir Bejanoff are now all a lap down. Andreas Allen and Damir Bejanoff received damage from that previous large wreck. James Davis would get to the inside of Robert Moss on the front stretch and would make the pass going into turn 1. A lap later, Robert Moss would do the exact same thing, with some help from Zach Harvick and Mitch McDonald to push James Davis to the outside. Mitch McDonald would then try to get to the inside of Robert Moss, but Robert Moss would cut him off and continue as leader. James Bond then got a huge run going into turn 1 with some help from Ilya Bondarenko, and he would take the lead going onto the backstretch. James Bond was pushed up the track by Ilya Bondarenko, who took the lead down the front stretch. Three-wide racing continued back in the field with Zach Hofschneider, Damir Bejanoff, and Nicholas DeFort being caught right in the middle of it. Onto the backstretch, Richard Trelinsky would get to the inside of Ilya Bondarenko and take the lead. Richard Trelinsky would remain unchallenged for the next few laps. Eventually, some of the other drivers regained their sense, and Dixie Normus would get to the inside of Richard Trelinsky. Out of turn 4, James Davis and Nicholas DeFort made contact, and Mark Nutt was just an innocent victim there. He was turned driver's side first in the outside wall. After pit stops, Dixie Normus would remain as the leader, and she would lead them back to the green flag. The lap down car of Damir Bejanoff would get to the inside of Dixie Normus going into turn 1 a few laps later. He's just trying to get his lap back right now, and that helped Richard Trelinsky get around Dixie Normus for the lead. Pichu London got to the inside of Richard Trelinsky shortly afterwards. A couple laps later, Richard Trelinsky would succeed in getting to the inside of Pichu London, and he would take the lead going into turn 1. On the 53rd lap, James Davis and the other leaders would catch up to the lap traffic of Luke Walker. Damir Bejanoff would once again try to get his lap back, and he would pass the leaders. Shrimp Engritz would be the beneficiary of catching up with the slower cars, as he would get the lead. A lap and a half later, Robert Moss would get a run on Shrimp Engritz and try to take the lead, but wouldn't be able to do so. About 5 laps later, Robert Moss would finally be successful in getting to the inside of Shrimp Engritz, and he would make the pass out of turn 2. A few laps later, Leo Walker would get to the inside of Robert Moss, and unlike many of Robert Moss's attempts, Leo Walker would be able to get the lead on her first attempt at trying to pass Robert Moss out of turn 2. Robert Moss would pull a crossover move on her out of turn 3 the next lap, and with some help from James Davis, he would be able to take the lead. Shortly afterwards, James Davis would get to the inside of Robert Moss and try to take the lead. 4-wide racing would cause Pichu London and Shrimp Engritz to get into Zachary Brown. Jacob Young then plowed into Zachary Brown. Meanwhile, Mitch McDonald, trying to avoid the wreck, got turned by Zach Hofschneider. He would slide up the track right in the path of Stephen Henhoff. Leading them back to the line would be James Davis, who just edged out Robert Moss. James Davis and Robert Moss would remain 1-2, as many of the other lead lap cars would come in pit stops. James Davis would lead the field back to the restart. We now have 6 cars off the lead lap. Damir Bejanoff would get ahead of James Davis, still trying to get back on the lead lap. Robert Moss would get a huge run on James Davis and get around him in turn 3 and 4, and then he would get around Damir Bejanoff, putting him once again a lap down. Ilya Bondarenko received terminal damage in the last wreck, so he would be in the pits for the remainder of the race trying to repair that. Back on track, Pichu London and James O'Shea made contact, and they went huge way up into the air, and Pichu London with an enormous flip. James O'Shea also did a nosedive right into the ground. Robert Moss would lead the field back to the green flag on what would be the final restart of the race on lap 74. Robert Moss would use Damir Bezhianov as a drafting partner for a few laps before deciding that he would put Damir Bezhianov back a lap down. Just as Damir Bezhianov tried to get to the inside again, James Bond made it 3 wide going into turn 1. James Bond would get the lead and would hold on to it for a few laps as the rest of the field battled for second place. About 6 laps later, James Davis would finally catch back up and he would dive to the inside going into turns 1 and 2 and make the pass. James Davis would then hold the lead for a few laps until Richard Trelinsky got to the inside and made the pass off of turn 2. A couple laps later, Alex Tanker and Dixie Normus made it 3 wide going into turn 1, pushing Richard Trelinsky and forcing him back in the field. Alex Tanker and Dixie Normus continued to battle for the lead going into turn 3 until James Bond once again made it 3 wide. With some help from the lap down car of Damir Bezhianov. Damir Bezhianov would once again get ahead of the leaders, and Leo Walker would get to the inside of James Bond the next lap, going into turn 3. Leo Walker and Damir Bezhianov would once again come up to slow traffic, which would hold up some of the other major contenders, such as James Bond. Leo Walker would have to check up to get around Zachary Brown, and Robert Moss would get to the inside with some help from Mason Wood. Out at turn 2, Zach Harvick got a run and he would get to the inside. They continued battling 2 wide until they got onto the front stretch. Damir Bezhianov, still trying to get his lap back, got to the inside of the leader Zach Harvick and would make the pass out of turn 2. Zach Harvick would perform a crossover move on him, going onto the front stretch, and would continue with the lead. Damir Bezhianov would pull another crossover move on Zach Harvick and try to get his lap back once again. This would help Mason Wood and the other leaders catch up to Zach Harvick, and they would get around him off of turn 2. James Bond would then get to the inside of Mason Wood, exiting turn 4, and would take the lead down the front stretch. Meanwhile, Richard Trelinsky, in second place, dived around Leo Walker and Mason Wood to get second. Off of turn 4, Richard Trelinsky would then get a run around James Bond, and he would take the lead. Richard Trelinsky would get around Damir Bezhianov and used him as a drafting partner, and Richard Trelinsky would continue around on the final lap as Damir Bezhianov tried once again to get his lap back, but Richard Trelinsky would come off of the final turn and win the race.